The Minister for Housing, Planning and Local Government, Eoghan Murphy, is with me in studio. Minister, good morning.
Good morning. When we look at the challenges that we currently face in homelessness, when we look at things like the tragic deaths that we saw last week, and we knew we had a crisis in homelessness before these deaths, and it's very unfortunate that people in homelessness do die. We also have this very difficult situation with homeless families. Over the course of the last few months, I've been looking at different ideas. One of the things that I talked about when I first got the brief and I began to look at this in detail was the potential to bring back something like bedsits that we had in the past. We have these in other countries. We have these in other cities where you have modern accommodation, but you have shared facilities, and people are willing to, to be able to live closer to where they work, or to pay less rent, they'll sacrifice something like the size of their living space or sharing facilities, and they're happy to do that. There's absolutely a correlation between the fact that we've got rid of bedsits and we now have far more homeless individuals, particularly men, on the streets.
In the long run, bedsits are not going to be the answer to the problem for families.
No, of course, no. That's a small part of the solution. I was giving an example of something that perhaps is more radical, but I do think may be necessary, but we'll be talking about that when we launch the review.
We know that as councils reneged on their obligation to house their own people, we know that, and there was lots of excuses. We had a crash, we had the monies that they were taking in from developers' levies and all the rest dried up, and they said they couldn't afford it. But really, in the 1930s and the 40s, when the money wasn't there, councils were still building huge numbers of social houses.
Pat, our problems here go back longer than the crash, and it's not fair to lay it at the council's door. It was government decision to try a different way of providing social housing and to provide it through the market, and that hasn't worked.
Does it go back that far, or is it more recent?
The dysfunction in our housing market absolutely goes back into the 90s, when we had to start to then bring in certain incentives to get the housing market going. We hit a particular problem in 2002 when certain incentives were extended when they weren't necessary, and this combined with a lot of credit in the market, and I don't want to go back over what we learned in the banking inquiry and other forums, but that decision that social housing would be delivered through the private market was a mistake.